So today's webinar, we're going to be talking about AWS security. Again, my name is Kevin G. I am a senior technical product marketing manager here at Red Canary. My primary focus here is on our MDR for cloud kind of area. I also work very closely with our sales team, SEs, and customers, kind of understanding some of the return on investment calculations around building an internal SOC versus investing in third-party security teams, and kind of the things that you have to focus on when you're doing those calculations, as well as some internal competitive intel stuff. I've been here at Red Canary for a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I was at a cloud access security broker as a technical marketing engineer for about 5 years, where I worked pretty closely with the SEs to kind of build and maintain the demo environment. I also did a lot of training, both internally and for customers, as well as running a bunch of kind of cloud security labs and stuff like that for them to play around with. Some personal information about me. If I am not working and the weather is okay, I'm up in Portland, Oregon. So right now during the winter, it's kind of hit or miss. You could probably find me on the golf course. I'm a pretty obsessed golfer, trying to get to scratch. But recently I have not been playing to my handicap level displayed there. But I'm going to blame that on the winter weather conditions and hope that in another couple of months, when it gets a little bit better, my game will improve as well. So let's dive right in to why you guys came. So just kind of a brief agenda here. What I'm going to do is we'll start off with kind of a high-level overview of what are the main kind of goals of the adversaries when they're trying to target your AWS environment, and kind of what are the main avenues of those attacks. Then we're going to kind of highlight how we kind of see whether it's through our own conversations with our customers or prospects, or a lot of the industry surveys that are out there with CISOs and stuff like that, that a lot of companies are starting to become more amenable to a sort of hybrid approach to their security operations team, and recognizing that they might not be able to handle everything on their own internally. And then we'll kind of cover how Red Canary helps you secure your AWS environment. I'll kind of go through a high level kind of attack chain and where Red Canary kind of fits into those places. And then I'll kind of show you some of our threat timelines and some of the things that we've detected, all anonymized data put into some of our demo environments. But real quick, before we begin, a quick poll question, and this is almost kind of like a teaser for a future webinar. So basically just kind of getting a general sense out there of everyone here within your own organization. Are you currently using a cybersecurity framework to assess your own sort of strengths and weaknesses and how you address? It could be cloud security or just your security team in general, kind of like all of those needs. A good reference is the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I think a lot of organizations tend to use, but there are other ones out there. So, yeah. So anyways, diving right in as you answer that poll question, when you really boil it down for what is the adversary attempting to do, it's pretty simple. It almost seems too simple for really the need for an MDR or an MSSP or a whole slew of security operations experts and stuff like that. But really the end goal is they are trying to gain access. So any way possible to break into your environment and utilize that access and access to your data to make money. That's really what it boils down to. The majority of breaches are all going to revolve around some form of data exploitation, whether that's theft and exfiltration, at which point they exploit you for that data, pay up, or we release this publicly or sell it on the dark web, or we'll give it back to you, whatever, or, through the standard sort of ransomware where they encrypt your system and kind of lock you out of it, and stuff like that. But that's really all it boils down to. Now, obviously, when you get into the details and the minutia of how that happens is where you get into the trickier aspects of security, and we'll kind of go through that in this webinar. So how do breaches happen? So here I'm kind of showing you a couple of data points strictly from Verizon's data breach report, as well as IBM's cost of a data breach report from last year as the most recent ones. Really, it doesn't matter what report you look at across the industry, whether you're looking at these guys or other threat research out there, these kind of numbers are basically what you're saying, is that the majority of breaches are all going to involve the human element to some degree. And a large portion of that is malicious actors trying to target your users and their credentials. So in the grand scheme of things, regardless of what tactics and techniques that they're using once they've gained access, this is the main thing that you have to pay attention to, right? Across your AWS environment and across just cloud infrastructure in general, or how most companies are starting to use dozens upon dozens of SaaS applications, your users' credentials, right, their identities, and especially your admin credentials are kind of like the key to the kingdom, especially as it relates to something like AWS, where it is your entire infrastructure. In some cases, it might be where you're hosting your production environment. If you are a SaaS company where you're servicing your customers through some sort of SaaS application or online tool, stuff like that, right? Getting access to somebody's credentials kind of gives them access to a whole slew of other things and resources. So really paying attention to that. So again, a large portion of attacks are either going to be directly targeting your users' credentials to gain access through phishing and stuff like that, business email compromise and so forth. While the other percentage, and this number might change depending on where you look, but a large number of some of the biggest breaches that have occurred over the past 5 years, 10 years, a lot of them end up being related to some sort of human error, right? The accidental misconfiguration. Oops, I left my S3 bucket publicly exposed, right? Or I left it open to the public. I mismanaged my contextual access controls, or I left an admin account available, or I didn't change my default admin stuff. So a lot of them kind of relate to this. And really it's paying attention to your users and how that initial access attempt happens, where you can prevent the most amount of breaches. But even knowing all of that, time and time again across industry surveys, and here's a couple, including IBM's data breach report, is that most organizations find, or at least respond on these surveys, that they recognize that they're lacking something in order to address these threats. We're constantly seeing high percentage of numbers that say, hey, most companies are very, very worried about cloud security threats. It's probably why you're on this webinar or maybe attending some of our future cloud webinars. And they recognize that they either are impacted by the cybersecurity skills shortage, they can't hire enough people, they don't have enough staff on hand to fully address those threats and to be able to monitor all of their security tools that they've invested in 24/7 on the weekends and all that stuff. Or maybe they feel like their team lacks some security knowledge or expertise in order to make sense of the alerts that they're seeing or how to respond in a timely manner and so forth. And we're starting to see in these surveys that a lot of these companies are suggesting, like, yes, either we are currently evaluating a third-party security service, we are interested in it, we're already using it, or we plan to in the next couple of years. One of the data points I do want to point out here is from that IBM cost of a data breach report. In it, they found that across all the breaches that they studied through 2022 and 2023, that only 33% of those breaches were actually identified by that company's own internal security team. So pretty eye-popping numbers. So what that means is that the other 2/3 of breaches they found were either identified by a third-party security team or were revealed by the adversary themselves. So either way, it was something that was going unidentified internally. So before we get into how Red Canary kind of fits in this picture real quick and some of the attack chain type stuff, let's look at some of the poll results from you guys using Framework. So pretty good split here. About 2/3 of you guys are using some sort of cybersecurity framework, while the others are not. So one of the reasons why I bring this up is to kind of talk about how Red Canary fits in to your security operations team and how you should be thinking about your own security operations center, or just how you operationalize your security team in general. And this is kind of a tease for some of our future webinars here. So when you think about addressing cybersecurity, whether it's in the cloud or across the rest of your environment, there are kind of different pillars that are parts of these cybersecurity frameworks that you really need to focus on, and it can help you kind of assess where you're strong, where you're weak, where you feel like you might need help, and stuff like that. And that could help you kind of address those challenges and needs that you might need in the future. So, you might think about it from like threat intel and research. Who's in charge of staying on top of the latest tactics and threats that are out there to make sure that you're able to detect those things as they come about in the future, or what adversaries are using, what type of tools or things that you're investing in for preventing things from happening or preparing your team, whether those are tabletop exercises or readiness exercises, or the tools that you invest in to help you identify those accidental misconfigurations. And then obviously the detection and response part, who's in charge of monitoring your environment and making sense of the alerts, identifying what's suspicious and what's benign, and actually being able to properly remediate those things, having the skills and experience necessary to do that before a breach impact happens. So with Red Canary, I could go through each of the different things that we fill out in those kind of 4 columns here. But really what our goal is to be an extension of your existing security team. We're not trying to replace anything by any means. All we're trying to do is help you recognize where you're strong at and where you feel you need help at, and then we'll just kind of be there to fill in the gaps. Maybe you feel like you have the threat intel and research and you run plenty of tabletop exercises, and you feel like you have the prevention stuff on lock, but you need help with that detection and response. We'll be there to help you kind of fill in those gaps. We'll provide that 24/7 monitoring, give you your nights and weekends back, make sure that we're detecting things when you're asleep, and we'll, again, be ready with a security team to provide that proactive security guidance and ability to respond when something is discovered, and so forth. So what are we specifically doing with AWS, as this is an AWS webinar after all? So we are tying along the control plane directly into your guard duty alerts and your CloudTrail audit logs. So what we're doing is we're ingesting all of that information, all that raw event log data, as well as the native generated alerts from AWS. And that we kind of use those alerts as kind of early tip-offs for us to figure out where to spend time for the deep investigations. But also, if we notice something in the behavioral activity logs and stuff like that, or just the general event logs within CloudTrail that we see as suspicious, we'll start our own sort of deep investigations to identify suspicious activity across the board and help you identify threats before they become like a major problem or before that endpoint breach ever occurs. So that kind of covers the control plane. We also offer a Linux EDR agent for all of the resources that you might be spinning up in AWS. So whether you have containers, virtual machines, you have your production environment hosted on AWS and all that stuff, and you're worried about those runtime threats, we do have a lightweight agent that we can install to, again, do some of the same sort of things, collect all of that raw telemetry log data, perform our own deep investigations with all of our threat intel and research backed up behind us to help you identify, real-time threats and be able to respond accordingly if something were detected. So what does a attack chain look like? So where is Red Canary kind of inserting ourselves in here? Where are we focusing? So this is a very high-level thing. We'll go into a little bit more detail. But in general, as a security company, our focus is to kind of help you avoid that final breach impact point, right? We're trying to catch everything as early as possible to avoid the point of no return where the adversary has gained access to your data, has already, encrypted it or exfiltrated it. Because at that point, the breach has already happened, and it's more about damage mitigation than it is about threat detection and response at that point, right? The threat has already occurred. So our goal is to focus early and often on those initial access attempts, as we highlighted, and all of the suspicious activity that they'll be doing in order to lead up to that final point of data exfiltration to be able to stop it well before it becomes damaging to your organization. So let's go into a little bit more detail on what that really looks like in practice. and where Red Canary itself is inserting itself. So again, the initial access point, again, this is probably the biggest focus area right here, right? And again, how they gain access to your environment will differ, but these are all the sorts of things you need to pay attention to, right? The malicious access attempts, where they are actively trying to steal or compromise your user or admin credentials. That could be through a variety of social engineering tactics, whether it's, phishing attempts is still very, very common. Multi-factor authentication exhaustion, just being able to socially engineer somebody by constantly, repeatedly sending them MFA requests until they finally capitulate and click the yes button because they're frustrated and they're busy focused elsewhere, things of that nature. Brute force type of attacks are still pretty prevalent, randomly guessing your login and passwords and stuff like that. The accidental ones we highlighted as well, right? Those are the internal misconfigurations or mismanagements, right? Not keeping up with security patches, leaving things vulnerable, not paying attention to your security policies or your role permissions and stuff like that, leaving things too open where somebody might be able to exploit that if they know the right IP address and right OAuth keys and stuff like that to be able to gain access. And then occasionally you see kind of the combination where it takes some sort of, fluke incident of some sort of account that should have been disabled but was never disabled, that was still active. Maybe you forgot to change some default admin account somewhere, or somebody used a password that they previously used in another system that was breached, right? Some other SaaS application was breached and you weren't, but some admin reused the password from that breach within your own environment, and maybe that account still exists even if they don't work at your company anymore, type of thing. So these are different ways. So what we're doing, again, we're tying into those guard duty alerts and CloudTrail logs, where we're looking at all of the suspicious access attempts to kind of identify whether something malicious is happening, right? We're tracking the user and we're kind of baselining their behavior on like when they're logging in, what device they're coming from, what IP address and stuff like that. Identifying things like cloud token theft, where when a admin logs in and based on the context might assume a role using your AWS role ARN permissions to assume a greater role to perform greater admin activities, a cloud token gets generated and it's tied to that session. There's a session ID. So monitoring that session ID and seeing if that becomes active somewhere else tied to another IP address or another endpoint down the line, things of that nature. So let's say a malicious actor is able to get in. What are the type of activities that we're looking for, the type of tactics that they're going to be performing internally within your environment? So the moment they get in, very likely the first thing they're going to do is a form of like reconnaissance and discovery. They're going to be running a number of search queries across their account and your resources, right? Trying to discover what permissions they have currently with the account that they've logged into, what other accounts are existing, where your resources are, and where the data is. And then they're going to be finding ways to establish persistent access and ensure that the accounts that they're using have the right permissions to all of those resources and to be able to do what they need to do. So that might be looking like privilege escalation, increasing the role that they have, finding ways to assume other role permissions, or maybe they're using their account to create different accounts that have the necessary permissions but not full global admin permissions, and use those in order to perform some level of defense evasion to kind of hide their activity from you. They might be performing lateral movement, poking around the different systems and other resources that you might have tied to that admin account to kind of see where else they could get into, to find other additional, data points and things for them to either compromise or steal. And then obviously, finally, once they get to the breach point where they've identified that data, they'll start to establish some sort of external connection to, some other external server, IP address and stuff through an API to start extracting data in bulk as quickly as possible. So again, what Red Canary is doing here, we're monitoring all of that internal behavioral activity. We're correlating it with whatever alerts that are being generated by guard. With a lot of that login activity that we're seeing. And we're kind of piecing things together in order to gain the most context and paint a clearer picture of what is happening, right? A one-off type of thing that looks suspicious, but every other activity might be normal. We'll investigate that to kind of help determine, hey, is this a normal user, doing something that is a little out of their ordinary, or is this something threatening? But if we see, a potentially suspicious login attempt, some recon stuff, and then suspicious, account creations, you could tie all of that information together to indicate, hey, something malicious is definitely happening here. This is a real threat. Let's react to this, disable that user account, make them change their password, refresh the cloud token, all of that stuff to ensure that you are preventing the final breach from happening. So again, the final breach impact, the things that you typically see out there, encryption, exfiltration of your data for ransomware. Occasionally we see, crypto mining type things where they're utilizing access to your resources to kind of benefit that way. Though I think that's less so becoming prevalent as crypto mining is not as popular as it was a year or two ago, even if Bitcoin is still pretty high on the price range there. But I think that type of activity only really occurs if you're very busy and just really not paying attention to your resources. I'm pretty sure most companies within a month would discover somebody utilizing their resources because their costs in AWS would skyrocket pretty quickly. So again, what we're doing here is we just have a team of threat hunters that are ready on standby to kind of walk you through that whole remediation process to prevent this stuff from happening. So the moment something is identified, we're there contacting you and assisting you through the entire remediation process. The benefit of an MDR versus something like handling things internally is that, we have combined, years upon years of experience reacting to threats. We have the ability to provide you that sort of herd immunity where we're learning from other customers' environments, whether they are smaller than you, larger than you, within the same vertical or not. We're kind of seeing all the different tactics and threat techniques that are out there, and utilizing that information to benefit the larger customer base. And then, of course, our team of threat hunters are doing this every single day, every single hour, responding to malicious activity in real time. And so they have the expertise and knowledge to kind of help you nip that in the bud very quickly. So I know we're running short on time. I'll try to keep this quick. I'll show you just a couple of threat timelines here real quick. I'm going to make sure that I see it on my screen. Okay, cool. So here are a couple examples of real quick threats within AWS that we've identified and, again, moved over to a demo environment and kind of anonymize a lot of the data. So within our platform, when you're looking at the threats, very quickly at the top, we'll immediately highlight with a short description of what is happening. Here, a temporary IAM session communicated with AWS 3 from different resources within a short period of time, which often indicates a credential has previously been compromised. When you scroll down, you can kind of see the timeline of here. Again, anonymized, some user assumed a role within an AWS API request. So they are assuming some sort of admin role within EC2. And then we could see that that access, they were trying to access some key ID, and then we noticed some suspicious IP address later on. And then they were trying to do some sort of put object API request as well in here, where the threat was finally fully identified based on all of that. So this one tends to indicate a cloud token theft. So again, when a cloud token is used during that kind of role assumption, from the admin, a session ID is created. And so when we track that session ID, if we notice it coming from a different source, that pretty much indicates that somebody has compromised your credential and stolen that cloud token here. Down at the bottom, here's just some recommended remediation steps, and then the final comment to basically indicate that, hey, we did revoke that user session and disable the user and refresh the token. Here's another one that's more just kind of an example of some of the internal activity that we're tracking. So again, you could kind of see a quick summary at the top. IAM user logged in, and they basically tried to do a bunch of activity and post-exploitation reconnaissance. So they're attempting to do a bunch of discovery as well as establishing persistent access, doing a bunch of very, very suspicious things. Down below under the threat analytics stuff, you could kind of see the exact techniques that we're observing. So here it's all indicative of basically the discovery tactic. You can see it tied to the MITRE attack technique as well down here, and you can click that to view it. And then we'll also indicate what our internal detector is called that helps us identify this activity. So just going through just real fast, I'll kind of scroll through this pretty quick. You'll see, you know, failed login attempts and then successful login attempts. Here they're trying to read an account summary. Here they're trying to create virtual multi-factor authentication devices. You could see some of our comments as we're tracking all of this in real time. And again, when a threat's identified, we're going to go back in the past and look at other activity and kind of tie it all in to this threat timeline to give you the full context of everything that led up to the threat and everything up until the point where we help you remediate it. So you could see them failing to create one and then eventually successfully creating a separate multi-factor authentication device. Here they're trying to get a list of a bunch of access keys, at which point they eventually succeed. So they're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall here, getting more lists, listing out policies and so forth. So basically this is kind of what we're doing is we're tracking all of those techniques and tying everything together and looking at the logs. And of course, like at some point during this process, we are reaching out to you and working with you to kind of help identify like, hey, is this like a normal user? What's happening here, and get you kind of clued in. And once we identify a real threat is happening, we'll go ahead and step in. So to kind of finish off here with just kind of like a final kind of concluding sort of thing. Again, our goal at Red Canary, we're just trying to be an extension of your, you know, security operations team, no matter what that looks like. So whether you need us to provide that 24/7 detection and response capabilities, monitoring all of your, you know, alerts and event logs and stuff like that, and being able to step in, we're there. We're also there to help you with all of the threat intelligence and threat research to make sure that you're staying ahead of what the adversaries are trying to do. And again, beyond the control plane, we also cover your runtime environments with our Linux EDR offering. So I appreciate you guys attending. That 30 minutes went by super quick on my end. So hope you guys learned a lot. Just a couple quick cleanup things here. So what's next for you guys? If you want to learn more, obviously go to our website. If you want kind of a more hands-on demo or to kind of really dive into some of those threat timelines, go ahead and request a demo through that link right there. And then of course, check out all the resources here. One thing that I didn't really get a chance to talk about during the webinar, but I kind of alluded to in the misconfiguration stuff, is that obviously these cloud environments like AWS and Azure and GCP, they're very complicated because of how much they're able to do, right? They're essentially the ability to fully replicate whatever you were originally doing on an on-prem environment in the cloud within your infrastructure. So, you know, you have your large data lakes, you have your EC2 instances, you have virtual machines, you have all of your containers and whatever else that you're spinning up. That's a lot of things to kind of keep track of and maintain, which also means that there's a lot of settings and configurations and policies and how you manage your users and what roles they're assuming and what permissions they have. And all of that stuff. That's a lot of things to kind of pay attention to, and it's very easy to not know something if you aren't super experienced in AWS or if you're new to it, or even if you've used it for a while, there might be some areas that you're not fully aware of. So in our resources, recently in the past like month or two, we released a AWS visibility guide. So that guide kind of goes through a lot of those details. It kind of talks about the common policies, configurations and settings that you're going to be using across the board with all the different resources that you might be spinning up, kind of giving you a baseline foundation of how to understand them, what they do, and how to utilize them properly so that you're not leaving yourself potentially accidentally open to some of those threats. Because again, that initial access part is kind of where you want to focus the most. So yeah, go ahead and check that out. That is very good. It's put together by some of our community team members, and it's been kind of great. Like I've learned a lot reading through it as well. So that is it for me. I'll kind of stick around. I know we're kind of a minute or so past the scheduled time, but if any of you guys have questions, I'm here to answer them. And does look like we at least have a few.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Let's get right into them. First one here, relating the threats you were just demoing. Are those threats based off of CloudTrail logs?
Yes, those were definitely pulled from CloudTrail logs. So it's all of the activity that we're ingesting from those log data points. So anytime those, an admin account or, again, somebody intercepting a cloud token and assuming those sessions, whatever activity that they're generating, the moment CloudTrail sees them, it gets sent to us, and then we kind of investigate and, look at them to kind of see, hey, what is happening here, and we'll start tying that all together. So all of those API requests and get commands and stuff like that. Yeah, that's all coming from CloudTrail.
Awesome. And then our final question, beyond AWS, does Red Canary integrate with any other cloud security tools?
Yeah, good question. So obviously there are a host of third parties, cloud security tools that also help you kind of protect your AWS investment and stuff like that. So right now we are currently partnered with two primary companies, Lacework and Wiz. Right now, our integration with Lacework is ready and complete. We've been a partner of theirs for about 1.5 years now or so. So we integrate with their Polygraph platform, and we'll take in those alerts, and really kind of the benefit with that partnership. And with Wiz, our integration is not quite ready with Wiz, but it is coming soon. So kind of stay tuned for information. I know we have a lot of customers that have been asking about a Wiz integration, so that is in the works as we speak. But the partnership is actually completed. So partnering with companies like that are pretty heavily focused on the kind of CSPM side of thing, the cloud security posture management stuff that is looking at your configurations, is this a really good pairing to kind of help us identify those misconfigurations. So we're primarily looking at the behavioral activity and the active events that are happening in real time. So those type of tools are looking at the status of your environment at any given point, and using their own kind of internal metrics or whatever CIS benchmarks they want to compare to suggest what is a misconfiguration or not. And in Wiz's case, they kind of have their own unique sort of combination identifiers for alerting on issues. So those type of things can help you identify when a misconfiguration has happened, but they don't necessarily tell you why it happened or who did it. Really, they're just kind of looking, is this correct or not? And so when we take that information, we could correlate that and pair it with the behavioral activity to help you indicate, like, hey, that misconfiguration, that was just an accident. It's nothing to worry about. You just need to correct it, but nothing malicious is happening. Or we see a misconfiguration, like somebody stealing somebody's credentials and then opening an S3 bucket publicly and starting to pull information. We could start to say, hey, no, that is definitely something malicious, and we've identified that through that correlation.
Perfect. And then one more question to tie up everything you just talked about. Is there a good resource to test the AWS CloudTrail and Red Canary integration?
Yeah, so what I would say, I know that a lot of times with like demos and POVs and stuff like that, it's definitely like a one-off case, because obviously we don't want to run a proof of value, proof of concept type of demo in somebody's own production environment, because that could be a little dicey if you're just doing a POC and sending us like real life information and stuff like that. But definitely when you schedule that demo and you work with some of our SEs and some of our security experts and stuff like that, we could figure out a way to help you test that, whether it's you spin up a demo domain inside of AWS, and you could run your own tests within there for whatever data and activity you're doing, and do that with Red Canary. I know that some customers have probably done some like red teaming type exercises to see if we've caught what seemingly like real life threat type activity and data to kind of test our system. So yeah, there are definitely ways to do that, and I would say
when you reach out with the demo, let them know. And I could also potentially find out who you might be working with and just kind of give them a heads up. Thank you.